Betrayal is a bitter disappointment that everyone experiences at some point in their lives when they place unconditional trust in others. Hopes are dashed by the weight of betrayal inflicted by those from whom you least expect it. The images of friends or family members may already be flashing in your mind, reminding you of what you've been through. If this has happened to you, know that you are not alone in your pain. Betrayal is a wound for which no one prepares you. From childhood, we are taught to trust, to believe in the best in people, and to give them the benefit of the doubt. But what would Carl Jung, one of the most prominent thinkers in psychology, have said about this? Would he have shared our belief in human goodness or made us question the naivety that seems to be a virtue but can actually be a dangerous trap? This is not just another call for distrust. Indifference will not be presented as the only solution, but the former naivety that made you vulnerable will no longer be an option. Everyone has the right to know the truth hidden in the shadows, in what they often prefer not to notice. Blind trust is like walking through a minefield. The danger is not realized until an explosion occurs, and only then does the question arise as to why the warning signs were not noticed earlier. But the truth is that these signs are always present. There is simply not always a desire to see them. Honestly, how many times have you wondered how we could not have noticed this before? The sting of betrayal is painful not only because of the pain it causes, but also because of the realization of one's own blindness. However, this is not a failure but a manifestation of human nature. That is what this article will be about. So, what are the 5 key reasons why you shouldn't trust anyone unconditionally, and how can you protect yourself without becoming a bitter and suspicious person? The first reason lies in the complexity and selfishness of human nature. This does not mean that the world is populated exclusively by scoundrels, but everyone subconsciously strives for personal gain. This behavior is rooted in evolution. Imagine our ancestors putting the interests of society above all else. They simply would not have survived. This principle still applies today. Hasn't it happened that a colleague you trusted stole your idea, or a close friend betrayed you in your most difficult moment? Why does this happen? In a critical situation, people put their own interests first, and it would be a huge mistake to assume that friends, family, or partners are exceptions to this rule. Reflecting on human nature inevitably leads to the question of trust and disappointment. In everyone's life, there have probably been moments when they unconditionally believed in someone, whether it was a work colleague, a close friend, or a wise mentor. This person seemed untouchable, a paragon of reliability and loyalty. And when that faith was betrayed, the pain was especially acute. It wasn't just betrayal, it was the feeling that part of one's own world had collapsed. Psychologist Carl Jung explained this phenomenon through the lens of emotional projection. People tend to project their own expectations and ideals onto others, seeing in them what they want to see rather than what is actually there. At the same time, they often ignore warning signs, subconscious hints that the person is not as perfect as they seem. Deception occurs not because another person is hiding their true essence, but because people deliberately or unconsciously close their eyes to the truth. Jung argued that one of the main mistakes is the inability to recognize the presence of a shadow in every person, even in those whom we love and value. The shadow is the dark, hidden side of the personality, often selfish and striving to satisfy its own desires. Even the most noble and selfless people are subject to the influence of this shadow. At certain moments, personal interests may outweigh moral principles, and this is where the potential danger lies. However, a key question arises: how should we proceed in this situation? Should we close ourselves off, building a wall of distrust around us, or should we learn to recognize the warning signs before it's too late? The real task is not blind trust or total suspicion, but finding harmony between them in knowing how to trust while remaining vigilant. If the reader has made it this far, it is worth thinking about those moments when they neglected their intuition, that barely perceptible inner voice that whispered about something being wrong. But driven by the desire to believe in the best, they ignored it, because admitting the truth would be too painful. As Jung said, intuition is one of the most powerful tools of the human mind, which we, unfortunately, often underestimate. If you get the feeling that something is wrong with someone, it is usually not without reason. The subconscious picks up on the subtlest signals much earlier than the mind realizes them. How many times have you had to pay the price for ignoring this inner voice? Imagine having the ability to train your mind to recognize these signs without succumbing to a state of constant fear, like an experienced traveler navigating unfamiliar terrain with confidence and caution. Vigilant observation, rather than distrust, should be the driving force. Let's revisit Jung. Blind trust is unwise, but trust with awareness and consideration is essential. Trust should be earned through actions, not mere words. It should withstand the test of time, not be based on empty promises. Let's examine our relationships with others from a different perspective. Have you considered the sincerity of your trust in people, or are you prone to seeing them as reflections of your own desires? Are you able to perceive them as they truly are, or do you merely project your expectations onto them? The real danger lies not in the absence of trust itself, but in its blind manifestation when we trust without considering the consequences. If this concerns you, stay with us to uncover another important truth: why those closest to us are capable of causing us the greatest pain. There are two types of pain, that which comes from strangers and that which is inflicted by those we love most. Experience shows that the latter is always felt more acutely. When we are hurt by a stranger, we tend to cope more easily, as we have no particular expectations and experience no disappointment. But when we are betrayed by someone to whom we have opened our soul, to whom we have entrusted our memories and innermost thoughts, the world around us seems to crumble. It is not just a painful blow, it is a fracture at the very core of our being. Perhaps you have faced a similar experience. Maybe it was a childhood friend with whom you shared joys and sorrows, or a loved one who knew all your vulnerabilities, fears, hopes, and doubts. Or perhaps it was a family member, a sibling, a parent, someone whose loyalty you never questioned. And then a moment arrives, a turning point, and everything changes. Years of trust collapse in an instant, revealing the bitter truth. The deepest betrayals almost always come from those closest to us. It's not that these people are inherently bad, but that they know us intimately. They know our weaknesses, they know how to inflict the most painful blow, and when they do, the pain is caused not only by the betrayal itself, but also by the realization that all the happy memories suddenly seem like a lie. Take a moment to consider those who possess the power to cause the greatest emotional pain. These are not distant colleagues or casual acquaintances, but those to whom we have opened our hearts and granted our trust. That is why it is so important not to surrender to blind faith, but to carefully choose those whom we allow to touch the most intimate corners of our souls. Carl Jung once observed that the root of most disappointments lies not in the malicious intent of others, but in the inflated expectations we place upon them. This does not mean that the fault lies solely with us, but it does point to a tendency to elevate certain people to such a high emotional pedestal that their fall becomes particularly painful and far-reaching. As an illustration, consider the story of Clara, a 48-year-old woman and an introvert by nature, who has always highly valued friendship. For 2 decades, Mariana was her closest friend. They shared joys and sorrows, divorces, career highs and lows, life crises, youthful dreams, and even those deep, melancholic moments when silence spoke louder than words. Clara never doubted Mariana, as they had 20 years of shared history that seemed impossible to erase. However, the day came when Clara accidentally learned that Mariana had been secretly sharing their confidential conversations with others. She revealed details about Clara's insecurities, her financial difficulties after the divorce, things that Clara had only trusted to her. The initial shock was deafening, and then it was replaced by sharp pain. It was painful not only because of Mariana's betrayal, but also because of the realization that every moment spent together was now overshadowed by infidelity. Imagine the depth of emotional wound that Clara experienced, perhaps similar to what you have had to endure. When betrayal strikes from within a close circle, it not only destroys faith in a specific person, but also undermines the very foundation of one's perception of human nature. The agonizing question, "Why didn't I recognize this earlier?" torments the mind like an unrelenting ghost of the past. The truth is that people often consciously turn a blind eye to warning signs, fearing to admit that a loved one is capable of causing pain. They desperately cling to an illusory sense of emotional security. As Jung taught, trust is like a fragile mirror, and even the slightest crack can distort its entire surface. The pain of betrayal comes not only from the act itself, but also from the agonizing realization that the idealized image of a loved one never matched reality. This revelation is the source of profound grief. Betrayal shatters not only trust, but the entire history woven from memories of the relationship. So, what is one to do in such a situation? Many, driven by a desperate desire to reclaim the lost, ideal version of the person, seek to forgive. Others, on the contrary, completely shut themselves off, vowing never to trust anyone again. However, there is another path, one that Jung would suggest, a path of encountering reality, free from illusions of perfection. To accept as a given that people are not divided into exclusively good or bad, but are complex, contradictory beings prone to making mistakes. Consider how often each of us has ignored small but troubling signs in the behavior of loved ones, simply to avoid the thought of potential pain. Perhaps these were cutting remarks veiled in sarcasm, broken promises, enigmatic glances, or other subtle signals that the subconscious mind picked up on but the conscious mind dismissed. There is no blame in this, as it is a natural defense mechanism of the psyche. However, constantly ignoring such warnings can lead to even deeper emotional wounds. Imagine another situation. Elena is 61 years old and has dedicated her life to caring for her family, trusting her husband implicitly. Together they built a shared world, raised children, experienced the joy of travel, overcame financial difficulties, and supported each other through illnesses. After so many years together, Elena was convinced she knew her husband inside and out. But one day a chance message on his phone turned everything upside down. It turned out that her husband had been living a double life for many years, and it wasn't just physical infidelity, but a deep emotional connection with another woman. He shared with her intimate secrets that Elena considered exclusively their shared secrets. What can be said to Elena in this tragic moment? That she should have noticed the warning signs earlier. Perhaps she didn't want to see the obvious, preferring to believe in the best, in the inviolability of their long-standing union. She naively believed that after so many years together, the question of fidelity should not even arise. But as Jung wisely cautioned, no one is immune to the dark sides of human nature. The betrayal of loved ones teaches us a painful lesson. No matter how well we know someone, we must never let our guard down. This is not a call to paranoia, but rather to conscious and selective trust. Trust based not on beautiful words and memories of the past, but on consistent actions. It is in these actions that the key to truly knowing a person lies. It takes time and careful observation, but one should never assume that we know someone completely. A shadow is always present. Jung urges us not to trust blindly, but to notice patterns in behavior, not just isolated moments. Before continuing our discussion, allow me to share an important thought for reflection. Consider whether the people around us appear as they truly are, or do we only see the version we want to believe in? In the next section, we will examine how words, however beautiful they may seem, can serve as tools of manipulation, and why blindly believing in them without supporting actions can lead to emotional tragedy. Stay with us, because the next truth may forever change your perception of human speech. Words possess amazing power. They can be like warming embraces on a frosty day, but they can also wound like a sharp blade. Often, deceptive kindness hides behind beautiful words. Remember how often you've been told exactly what you wanted to hear. I will never leave you. You are the most important person in my life. Believe me, I only want what's best for you. These words instill confidence and create an illusion of safety. However, the harsh reality is that words can lie, but actions always tell the truth. The renowned psychologist Carl Jung insightfully pointed out the hidden danger of words. In his view, what a person says reflects only the conscious part of their mind, the part that knows how to adapt to social norms, make a good impression, and manipulate. But the true self, the unconscious side of personality, invariably manifests in actions. This is where the zone of increased risk begins, because unconditional faith in the words of others, without analyzing their actions, is fraught with bitter disappointments. Surely a case comes to mind when you trusted promises and they turned to dust. Remember a friend who swore eternal support but disappeared in the most difficult moment, or a partner who swore unwavering loyalty but betrayed you with their actions. Many people are familiar with such situations, although few are willing to openly admit the pain and broken expectations they have experienced. Why do words possess such a hypnotic power? They provide an illusion of security and control. Promises that are pleasing to the ear bring instant relief, creating the impression that everything is under control. However, there lies a cruel irony. The more we cling to words, the more vulnerable we become in the face of reality. As an illustration, let me share a cautionary tale. Ricardo, a 25-year-old father of 2 daughters, dedicated a significant portion of his young life to hard work, striving to create a secure future for his family. In his pursuit of stability, he trusted his business partner implicitly, with whom he had worked for over 15 years. The partner always found the right words to bolster Ricardo's confidence. "We are a team. I wouldn't make any important decisions without your input. Believe me, I always put your interests first." For Ricardo, these words served as an unshakable foundation for their partnership. However, when the company was hit by a financial crisis, the bitter truth was revealed. The partner had been secretly transferring company funds to his personal account, acting behind Ricardo's back. This blow was not only a financial one for Ricardo, but also a deeply emotional shock. How could a person who had been professing loyalty and devotion for years commit such a deliberate betrayal? It was this realization that caused the greatest pain. It was not just about the material losses, but also about the shattering of faith in the sincerity of words that once seemed true and meaningful. How can one regain lost trust? The answer lies not in completely ceasing to believe in words, but in ceasing to perceive them as unconditional truth. If a person says they support you, you should carefully observe whether they are actually there for you in difficult times. If a partner declares their love, it is important to notice whether that love is manifested in everyday gestures and care. If a friend promises to be a reliable support, it is worth paying attention to whether they remain by your side, even when it does not bring them direct benefit. Now, I will make a statement of immense importance. The discrepancy between words and actions will sooner or later become obvious to everyone. A person can skillfully maintain an illusion, but the truth will inevitably break through. The fallacy lies not only in naively believing words, but also in neglecting signals that unambiguously indicate true intentions. Have you ever ignored oddities in behavior, preferring to believe beautiful promises? Have you tried to justify questionable actions, convincing yourself that there is no malicious intent behind them? If so, it is worth considering how this has affected your subsequent life. Have you ever regretted not taking action sooner? Share your thoughts, as personal experience can be a revelation that helps others see the truth. As Jung said, the human mind constantly creates stories. Internal narratives serve to justify the actions of others, as confronting reality can be too painful. Preference is given to believing in a random mistake or the possibility of correction. However, genuine changes are manifested not in words, but in concrete actions. Imagine the story of Louise, a 44-year-old woman whose relationship with her partner has lasted for over a decade. The man invariably swore his devotion to her, but certain nuances in his behavior make her feel an inexplicable anxiety. Encoded messages, evasive explanations, nightly phone calls, details that haunt her. Whenever Louise tries to discuss her concerns, her companion skillfully soothes her with affectionate words, assuring her that she is overly dramatizing the situation and that he would never hurt her because she is the most precious thing in his life. Sincerely wishing to believe him, like any person in love with their partner, Louise nevertheless feels internal discomfort. And here lies an important lesson. When a person's words and actions diverge, you should give preference to actions. This is not a manifestation of paranoia, but rather an act of emotional self-defense. Ignoring these contradictions can lead to serious consequences. Ultimately, Louise realizes the validity of her suspicions. However, the pain is caused not only by the fact of infidelity itself, but also by the realization that deep down she always felt something was wrong, but chose to ignore it. The question arises, how to distinguish unfounded paranoia from true intuition? The key difference lies in the following. Paranoia is characterized by all-consuming fear and anxiety, while intuition manifests as a quiet, barely perceptible whisper. It does not require immediate action, but only hints that something is wrong, without providing obvious evidence. It's best not to dismiss it right away, but rather listen carefully because, as Jung claimed, our subconscious is capable of picking up signals that the conscious mind has not yet fully recognized. It is suggested to pause for a moment and reflect on one question. Is there someone in a person's environment whose words instill faith, but whose actions indicate the opposite? Perhaps such thoughts cause discomfort, but awareness of this fact can protect against future disappointments. If desired, you can share your personal experience in the comments, because a spoken truth can be the first step towards mental recovery. Trust makes a person vulnerable to emotional manipulation. Has it ever happened to completely trust someone without questioning their intentions, even when intuition suggested otherwise? Perhaps it was a lover, friend, or relative. And when the realization came that this trust had been abused, a feeling of stupidity, vulnerability, and deception arose. If this has happened, don't blame yourself for weakness. This situation is a manifestation of what Jung called naive emotional projection. This happens when the desire to believe in the goodness of another person is so great that signs of danger are ignored. Blind trust can be compared to handing over the keys to your house to a stranger without thinking about what they might do there. Something similar happens on an emotional level. In situations of blind trust, manipulations are not always on the surface. Psychologists have long noticed an interesting pattern. People with increased empathy are distinguished not only by a desire to help others, but also by an unwavering belief in human kindness. However, it is these qualities that, paradoxically, make them more vulnerable to emotional manipulation. Manipulators, like experienced predators, unerringly identify those who are prone to unconditional trust, and it's not about the weakness of the victim, but about their willingness to give trust in advance, without requiring proof. As an illustration, we can cite the story of Marcello, a 55-year-old man who has always been the soul of his family. He was known as that uncle who never refused to help his nephews, lending money, giving wise advice, without asking for anything in return. His belief in good intentions was unwavering. One day, a distant relative appeared on his doorstep with a heartbreaking story: debts, unemployment, desperate need. Marcello, without hesitation, extended a helping hand, lent a significant amount of money, and warmly welcomed him into his home. The cousin exuded gratitude, saying the right words. "You are like a brother to me. I will never forget your kindness. I will return the debt as soon as I can." However, over time, his behavior underwent dramatic changes. He stopped helping around the house, began to spend money thoughtlessly, and constantly found excuses not to repay the debt. Marcello stubbornly ignored the warning signs until one day he discovered that his cousin was secretly leading a luxurious lifestyle at his expense. When he tried to hold him accountable, he heard words in response that deeply hurt him. Didn't he understand that they were so easy to manipulate? And this is the bitter truth. Manipulators unerringly identify those who can be unconditionally trusted, and when we too hastily bestow our trust upon them, we thereby reveal our vulnerability to them. Surely in the life of every person there was someone whose speeches are sweet, like honey, but whose deeds are far from these beautiful words. Who among us, looking back, has not had to realize that they did not see the obvious signals point blank? If this has happened to you, share your story, because it is your experience that can help others shed the veil from their eyes. And this is not some exceptional situation, but a fairly common phenomenon. Emotional manipulation, this insidious technique, often unfolds according to the following scenario. First, the manipulator wins favor, showering compliments and expressing gratitude. Then he skillfully creates an emotional dependence, making you believe that you are the only one who can provide him with support. And finally, he shamelessly uses this dependence, exploiting your kindness until it is in his interests. Have you ever had the feeling that someone abused your trust and then tried to make you feel guilty for being cautious or wanting to distance yourself? If so, feel free to share your experience. After all, there is great power in exchanging stories. Each story told serves as a reminder that no one is alone in this invisible emotional war. Experience, like that experienced by Carl, provides valuable lessons about the nature of trust. It is important to understand that true trust is not blind faith, but a conscious choice based on critical thinking. People should be judged not by their eloquent statements, but by their actions, which consistently repeat over time, forming a stable pattern of behavior. It is necessary to learn to listen to one's own intuition, that inner voice that is often drowned out by emotional desires. Trust does not arise from promises. It is earned by demonstrating consistency and sincerity in actions. Accepting this simple truth will not only protect against manipulation, but also provide a more realistic and sound view of interpersonal relationships. This does not mean becoming suspicious and cynical, completely closing oneself off from the outside world. It is about wise and selective trust. Grant it gradually, observing how it returns in the form of respect and sincerity. Healthy skepticism is not a sign of weakness, but a protective mechanism that protects against repeated disappointments. Every person deserves relationships built on honesty and mutual respect, not on empty promises unsupported by actions. The final choice always remains with us: to continue naively believing beautiful words, risking experiencing pain again and again, or to learn to recognize the truth hidden behind people's actions. It is actions, not words, that are the true reflection of their essence. If a person is willing to observe carefully, consciously, make decisions with open eyes, and not be afraid to see the truth, they will be able to build healthier and more harmonious relationships. Ultimately, it is not words that define our lives, but the actions that stand behind them.